Good evening. I'm Nima Rajan, and this is Forum Daily for Wednesday, December 14th. And tonight, we begin with a look at Canada's record high average rent prices. New data shows the average monthly cost to rent a home in Canada rose to a record $2,024 in November. And experts say that the trend does not show any signs of stopping soon. The National Rental Report, published on Tuesday, shows average rent across the country was at an all-time high in November. It was up 2.5% from October. The average monthly rent was also up $224 compared with a year ago, for a gain of 12.4%. Vancouver remains the most expensive place to rent in Canada, this with Toronto in second place. The report was based on data collected by Rentals.ca and Urban Nation from monthly online listings. All right, moving to UN biodiversity talks in Montreal, where developing countries walked out of the COP15 talks early this morning. Several disagreements led to the walkout. This includes the creation of a special fund to finance biodiversity conservation in poorer nations. The two-week conference is focused on conserving the world's biodiversity. Looks like winter weather is set to hit much of Canada, with a major storm system sweeping up from the United States. It's expected to bring snow, high winds, and icy conditions from eastern Saskatchewan all the way through to eastern Quebec. The Colorado Low dumped more than 152 centimeters of snow in the American Rockies, and it has spawned deadly tornadoes in the southern U.S. Environment Canada has issued special weather statements. They warn that the storm will bring up to 30 centimeters of snow and winds gusting to 70 kilometers an hour to western regions, as well as snow, freezing rain, and gusty winds to central Canada. All right, turning to a new poll with data on the federal voting intentions of Canadians. Leger's latest online survey of 1,500 Canadians found 33% of respondents would vote Conservative and 30% would vote Liberal if an election was held today. Both parties were down slightly in their support tallies from last month. This while the NDP climbed 2 points to 21%. And the People's Party of Canada doubled its support to 4%. Support for both the Bloc Québécois and the Greens held steady at 7% and 4% respectively. All right, well, on the East Coast, the Transportation Safety Board has yet to release its findings on the sinking of the Chief William Solace off Digby, Nova Scotia. Tomorrow marks the second anniversary of the sinking, and family members of the 6 crew members who died say they're looking for answers. Some want details released about how the boat's stability was affected by modifications, what oversight role Transport Canada played in certifying and overseeing the vessel, and what safety measures are needed to save lives going forward. Moving to Ontario now, where the provincial government says certain businesses have until June to stock up on naloxone kits and train staff to use them. The Labour Minister says the province will also make the opioid antidote kits and training free for qualifying small businesses. Monty McNaughton says it's part of the government's response to the opioid crisis. The province passed legislation last spring mandating that naloxone kits be available in high-risk workplaces, such as construction sites, bars, and restaurants. All right, well, Statistics Canada says manufacturing sales climbed 2.8% in October to $72.6 billion. The agency says sales were up in 12 of 21 industries it tracks. This was led by a 12.7% gain in petroleum and coal industry sales. Sales in the food manufacturing industry hit a record high in October, climbing 2.9% to $12.3 billion. When it comes to vacations, a new poll has found that many Canadians are choosing to work extra hours around their holidays. The poll for ADP Canada found that close to 2/3 of those surveyed say that they've worked extra hours before or after taking a vacation. This with an average of 20 additional hours. But it's an improvement from last year, when a majority of respondents said they worked an extra 21 hours before and after holidays. ADP Canada calls this a time-off tax. Canadian Blood Services says a slew of unfilled or canceled appointments over the past few months has left the blood supply lower than it would like. There were 31,000 fewer donors than before the COVID-19 pandemic. This means more pressure is on a smaller number of people willing to roll up their sleeves. Canadian Blood Services has 25,000 empty appointments to fill before the end of the busy Christmas and New Year periods. We'll be right back. Stay with us. As hospitals continue to battle a surge in respiratory illnesses across the country, doctors say influenza spread is starting to hit older adults. Recent data from the Public Health Agency of Canada shows that children under 5 still made up the highest number of hospitalized flu patients. But surveillance levels indicate that the rate of seniors being admitted for the flu isn't far behind. Infectious disease specialist Dr. Isaac Bogosh in Toronto says there is a perfect storm of a monster flu season. This without enough people getting the flu shot, as hospitals nationwide are overstretched dealing with COVID-19 and RSV. Well, joining us now to give us a picture of how this spread in viruses may be impacting older Canadians is Dr. Abhishek Raut, Medical Director at Apple Tree Medical Group. Dr. Raut, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Great to be here, Neva.
So, Dr. Raut, we're hearing a lot about respiratory syncytial virus and how it's impacting pediatric patients nationwide. But what about older adults? What risk does RSV in particular pose for them?
Right. So we always think about RSV as a disease that affects younger people, and that can certainly be true. If you're under the age of 2, RSV can be very dangerous. But those same infections, when we're looking at an older population, can be quite dangerous as well. If we look just south of the border, the United States, about 120,000 older adults are hospitalized with RSV per year, and about 10,000 of them die each year. So we're still talking about high-risk groups. Those risk groups typically are older adults, especially those 65 years and older, adults with chronic heart or lung disease, and adults with weakened immune systems. So adults can get RSV infections, typically will have mild cold-like infections, but sometimes it can certainly be much worse, resulting in worsening of the conditions like COPD, asthma, and even congestive heart failure.
Concerning information there, doctor. Now, other doctors are also warning of influenza spread in older adults. But how big of a spike are we seeing in seniors in Canada?
Right. As if RSV wasn't enough, we are now entering the 6th week of the national influenza epidemic. And at the national levels, what we're seeing is all surveillance indicators are steady or increasing. And nearly all of these surveillance indicators are above the expected levels that we would assume at this time of the year. So the spread of influenza is really starting to hit older adults, and the surveillance data is pointing to the hospitalization rates being not that far off from the hospitalization of children. And what we're seeing as well is that the hospitalizations are increasing over the coming weeks as well.
All right, Dr. Raut. And just to add on top of all of this, we're still not in the clear when it comes to COVID-19. So can you tell us a little bit more about that and what demographics are most impacted right now?
That's right. Just to add to all of those, so nationally, we have seen an increase in COVID-19 case counts in the last week. We're also seeing an increase in hospital use by COVID-19 patients. What we find in general, which is very similar to the other ones, is patients in hospitals and ICUs are typically older, usually above the age of 65, and do have comorbidities like high blood pressure and diabetes. Now, keeping in mind, if you look at COVID-19 as a whole, about 75 to 80% of all deaths have been in people aged 65 and older. So very concerning here.
All right, Dr. Raut. And what other options are available for people who must get their flu shots? We know Dr. Isaac Bogosh mentioned that this uptick in COVID and RSV in hospitals is kind of impacting the number of people getting their flu shots.
Right. So what we're seeing is it's a two-part issue. We have a physician resource issue where doctors are working more hours in hospitals, which means less time in clinic to really give their patients the flu shots. But we're also seeing a nuclear family issue because other people in the family are sick. The parents, patients, caregivers are less likely to really focus on the preventive care activities like the flu shot and more likely to focus on the immediate crisis. So the big options are really about physicians, pharmacists, everyone in healthcare stepping up, providing more support for patients, as well as more education on the importance of preventive care here.
All right, Dr. Raut, about a minute left here, but what about individual Canadians or viewers watching this? What kind of steps can they take to stay safe from this triple threat of viruses?
All right. So in the next 30 days, we have Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, Boxing Day, Omisoka, and New Year's. So I think the most important piece of advice I can give is that if you're starting to feel that small cold coming, stay home. Don't go to the family gathering. That small tickle in your throat could be RSV, it could be COVID-19, could be influenza. And while you might feel okay, I think our seniors and our younger children might not.
Good advice to consider. Dr. Rout, again, thank you for your time today, and we'll see you again next week.
Thanks so much for having me.
Stay with us. We'll be right back. And after the break, we're going to take a look at CPP and employment insurance premiums. Amid inflation and rising interest rates, one organization is calling on the federal government to freeze increases. We're going to speak with Dan Kelly, president of the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, up next. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business wants the federal government to freeze increases to the Canada Pension Plan and employment insurance premiums coming in the new year. It says the higher payroll deductions will reduce the take-home pay of workers, and that few small businesses are in a position to increase wages to offset rising premiums. CFIB President Dan Kelly says EI and pension contributions could increase by almost $305, which Canadians could use for groceries or utilities. Well, with us now to discuss the situation is Mr. Dan Kelly himself. Sir, welcome back to Forum Daily.
Good to be with you.
So let's start with a brief overview of the CPP and EI premium increases. What exactly would they look like for Canadians?
Yeah, so these two payroll taxes are going up in two ways. One, the rate is increasing, and secondly, the amount of your income that is exposed to the rate is rising as well. So the maximum that you pay your premiums on is rising too. Altogether, the EI rate and the CPP rate increase combined is going to add up to about $305 for a worker. For a small business, about $325 per employee. So if you as the employee are looking to your employer to make up the difference on your take-home pay, you may find that the answer is not great because the employer is going to be struggling to deal with their end of the premium increase. And you know that is a worry in these inflationary times. $300, that's not a small amount of money to be taken off of your take home every year, and your paycheck's going to be smaller January 1.
And on that point of the employer's perspective here, how do we expect this to impact businesses, especially small businesses, as they try to recover from already heavy pandemic losses?
Yeah, look, if you can believe it, even at this late stage, what is it, nearly 3 years into this, small firms are telling us, only half of small firms are telling us their sales are back to 2019 levels. Then you add the average $110,000 in debt that the average business took on to survive the pandemic. They're making interest payments at a higher rate on those payments. And then the costs going up on almost every line on their budget for payroll, for utilities, for, of course, for insurance and other goods. That's not leading to a terrific outcome. So any additional wage pressure taken off the top of their payroll budgets is going to have an impact. And we worry that it's not going to be a good one for workers.
All right, Mr. Kelly, well, we know CFIB is asking the federal government to freeze EI premiums, just like they did during the pandemic. So how realistic of an approach is this for officials?
At this late stage, it doesn't look like the federal government is going to change gears. We've been calling on them to freeze EI and CPP. Of course, for CPP, it's the provinces and the feds that combined have to turn the key if that's going to happen. But there are still some pathways that government could change gears, and that would be perhaps a budget measure to retroactively rebate some of the dollars that businesses have paid in these higher premiums, providing a little bit of breathing room for businesses to address their payroll budgets in 2023.
All right, Mr. Kelly, and what kind of moves are businesses considering amid these looming hikes? Are any job layoffs expected from these hikes?
We're in a tight job market right now, so that is the savings grace for workers. Right now, there are lots of jobs sitting vacant, and employers are desperate to find workers. But yeah, it's going to constrain them, and for some, we worry that could this be the straw that breaks the camel's back? There have been businesses struggling for almost 3 years now, dealing with all of these. At a certain point, that 18% of our members that tell us that they may in fact go out of business some of them may make that decision if they don't see a pathway back to profitability. Ottawa's making that worse. And of course, these aren't the only hikes that Ottawa has planned. EI CPP rates on January 1, carbon taxes and liquor taxes go up in early April. That's certainly not good, not helpful, on top of what we're dealing with right now.
All amid the rising cost of living, right, Mr. Kelly? Now, we just got about a minute left here, but have you received a response from government officials yet regarding this?
Well, the response is really the silence in terms of taking any action. We certainly have been discussing, they've been listening. They haven't moved yet. They did freeze, to their credit, EI premiums during 2020, 2021 and early 2022. But we are still pushing for some offsetting measures that could happen in budget 2023, which we're expecting in the early spring.
All right, we'll definitely have to keep our eyes on that. Mr. Kelly, thank you again for joining us today on Forum Daily.
Anytime at all.
Thank you. All right, we'll be right back. After the break, we're going to take a look at the major headlines and news stories from around the world. The United States marks 10 years since the Sandy Hook Elementary School tragedy. Ukraine intercepts explosive drones, and the EU and ASEAN countries commemorate 45 years of ties, while a deadly storm sweeps across parts of the United States. These stories and more news from around the world coming up next. Stay tuned. Today marks 10 years since the Sandy Hook Elementary School massacre. This was when 20 first graders and 6 educators were killed in Newtown, Connecticut. The child victims would have been 16 or 17 years old this year, just high school juniors thinking about college, getting their driver's licenses, and attending their first prom. Now instead, the families will mark a decade without them today. Since Sandy Hook, America has seen nearly 1,000 other school shootings. All right, switching gears to the latest on the war in Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky says, quote, the terrorists fired 13 Iranian-made drones at daybreak today on Ukraine's capital, and all were intercepted. Authorities say they thwarted a 2-wave Russian attack on Kyiv. Ukraine says its air defense system intercepted and destroyed 13 explosive-laden drones. But the wreckage from some damaged 5 buildings. No casualties were reported. South of our border, the U.S. Federal Reserve announced another increase to its key interest rate. The central bank announced a half-point increase on Wednesday. Though smaller than the Fed's previous 3/4-point hikes, the latest move will increase the costs of many consumer and business loans. All right, well, on the other side of the Atlantic, UK inflation eased in November. This comes as gasoline and diesel prices rose more slowly than the previous month. National data released today shows the Consumer Price Index rose 10.7% in the 12 months through November. This is down from a 41-year high of 11.1% in October and better than economists had expected. All right, well, meanwhile, one of Europe's biggest banks has announced its updated climate strategy. HSBC says it will no longer finance new oil and gas fields. It says it would still provide financing to existing fossil fuel projects and to energy sector clients, but it will assess the company's plans to transition to clean energy. Climate campaigners welcomed the move and said HSBC has provided a new baseline for other major banks. Staying in Europe, where the European Union and ASEAN countries are commemorating 45 years of diplomatic ties. EU leaders hosted counterparts from the Association of Southeast Asian Nations on Wednesday. The meeting is a nod to Asia's economic rise. The EU is looking for trade and investment possibilities across much of the world. This comes after its economy was battered by the COVID-19 pandemic, even before the war in Ukraine compounded the problems. All right, turning to Australia, which has signed a new security deal with Oceania island country Vanuatu. The deal comes as part of an ongoing competition with China for influence in the Pacific. The new security pact covers humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, law enforcement, cybersecurity, defense, border security, and maritime safety. Earlier this year, China signed a security deal with the Solomon Islands. Now, this raised alarm in the South Pacific that it could lead to a military buildup. In the Horn of Africa, 2 Ethiopians have filed a lawsuit against Facebook's parent company, Meta. This is over hate speech that they say was allowed and even promoted on the social media platform. This was amid heated rhetoric over their country's deadly Tigray conflict. Former Amnesty International human rights researcher Fisa Tekli is one petitioner, and the other is the son of a university professor who was killed weeks after posts on Facebook inciting violence against him. The case was filed in Kenya, which is home to the platform's content moderation operations related to Ethiopia. All right, well, back in the U.S., at least 2 people are dead after a destructive storm tore across parts of the country. The storm spawned tornadoes in parts of Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana, where the fatalities were confirmed. 5 tornadoes were confirmed across northern Texas, while elsewhere the storm brought blizzard-like conditions to the Great Plains. Well, in some otherworldly news, scientists have released the first-of-its-kind audio from Mars. It comes courtesy of the NASA rover Perseverance, which by chance had its microphone on as a whirling tower of red dust passed directly overhead. All right, well, back on Earth, the European Union has given its top human rights prize to the people of Ukraine. The prize was awarded in October, but the ceremony was delivered in person today. This was in France to 3 representatives of Ukraine. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time on Forum Daily.